Hey, AP Environmental Science, it's me, Mrs. Willis, and I am going to talk to you about solid and hazardous waste today. So you are going to learn what happens to your trash. So let's go ahead and get started. What is solid waste? Well, solid waste is pretty much anything that is not wanted. So anytime you put something in the trash can, obviously you usually probably don't want it at that point, that is considered solid waste. And look at how much the US produces every single year. That's 11 billion tons of solid waste produced per year here in the United States. So we have to figure out, what do we do with all of this waste? So what exactly is in our solid waste for municipal cities? So most of it is paper products, whether that be printing paper, cardboard, milk cartons, things like that, followed by yard waste, metals, glass, food waste, and plastics. Compare that with what is in our solid waste in the entire United States. You can see that mining waste is a big factor in our solid waste, followed by agriculture and industry. Now, if we look at what are some of the options for disposal, you're going to see there's a variety of methods that are used around the world. So there are open dumps that exist. Sometimes agencies do dump their solid waste into the ocean or rivers. There's sanitary landfills, which are often used here in the United States. Sometimes we also do export materials to developing countries. For example, batteries to China is a very big issue. And then lastly, we'll look at this at the end, incinerating, so burning trash to generate electricity. In an open dump, the basic principle is pretty easy to understand. You have a piece of land and you come to that area and you drop off your solid waste or your trash. They were very common in the past, but in developed countries now, they are usually outlawed or banned. In developing countries, they are still quite common, and what you will see sometimes is people, they live around these open dumps and they search for materials that they can sell to make money. Also, in developing countries, what you might see sometimes too is people pile their trash in, in a heap, and then they set it on fire. Open dumps do pose a lot of problems. Number one, disease is pretty rampant at open dumps. You have a lot of bacteria, pathogens that are in that solid waste. Rodent problems are also an issue. They do tend to gravitate towards that solid waste. The solid waste also can decompose, and all of the leachate can get into the groundwater and cause groundwater pollution. And lastly, any of those native species that live in the area may eat the trash and become very sick. And let's talk about tires, because tires can accumulate not only in open dumps, but they can sometimes be dumped illegally. And these rubber tires are breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and mosquitoes are vectors of disease. Oftentimes, they will carry diseases like West Nile virus, dengue, malaria, and if they have breeding grounds, then they will reproduce and spread this disease. How many developed countries deal with their solid waste problem is they create what are called sanitary landfills. So the process is pretty simple. You dig a giant hole and you line that hole with a plastic liner, something to protect the groundwater from that pollution. Then you place the solid waste in that hole and cover that solid waste every single day with about 6 inches of soil to make sure that the solid waste is protected from things like rodents and native species. The problem is only the newer landfills have the liners. A lot of the older ones still do have issues with groundwater pollution. And if the liners rip, you can have groundwater contamination. I know this is going to sound horribly unscientific, but something that is created from landfills is a liquid that I like to refer as trash juice. It's kind of like made from this material that has decomposed, right? Solid waste decomposition. And its technical name is leachate. Now, that leachate can contain a lot of toxic chemicals and pollutants that can get into the waterway and cause some serious damage. So, leachate is being created from this decomposing solid waste in either a sanitary landfill or open dumps. And so the newer sanitary landfills will actually have leachate retaining systems where they can actually collect the leachate and remove it from the landfill. But others, unfortunately, especially the older ones, they do not. A cool thing about sanitary landfills is the bacteria that are in that soil can actually assist in the decomposition of the solid waste. And as they break down that solid waste, they produce methane as a byproduct. So what we've recognized is that you can actually vacuum the methane out of a sanitary landfill and use it for electrical purposes. So you can burn it to spin a turbine to generate electricity. Disposal by incineration is a technique that is sometimes referred to as waste to energy. This is where trash is burned and the heat that is created from that burning will usually be used to turn water into steam, and then that steam will spin a turbine to generate electricity. Approximately 100 of these plants exist in the United States, but there's about 1,000 worldwide. As you can imagine, there are issues with incineration, and the biggest one is air pollution. So carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and heavy metals are all released when you burn solid waste. So that means at these facilities, they need to use air control or air pollution control devices to capture those air pollutants. So wet scrubbers and things can be placed on these smokestacks, but as you know, those can be expensive. And lastly, ash is produced. Just because you burn the solid waste doesn't mean there's not going to be any left over. So all that ash that's being produced will eventually make it into a sanitary landfill. Unfortunately, some countries do continue to dump their solid waste in the local waterway, whether that happens to be a river or an ocean, and that solid waste does end up in places that we don't want it to be in. And of course, organisms have been known to eat this solid waste, accumulate trash in their digestive tracts, and pass away. A known solid waste problem that's occurring in the Pacific Ocean is the Pacific Trash Gyre, or sometimes known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So what is happening is this solid waste is accumulating in the oceans. They're being picked up by these very local currents, and they're being carried away and kept in these locations because of circulating currents. And so a lot of islands and things that you wouldn't even think have solid waste on them, they are being littered with this urban runoff. A way that solid and hazardous waste is managed is through a piece of legislation called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And in this legislation, if you are a company that is creating this solid waste, you must track its movement throughout its lifetime. So who did you sell that hazardous waste to? Where is it being moved to next, and ultimately how does it die? Often this is called cradle to grave tracking, and it is required by federal law. Because we generate so much solid waste, it is becoming a real problem. A lot of times, urban cities are running out of room to place this solid waste in sanitary landfills. So a strategy was created. It's called the Integrated Waste Management Technique, and I think you probably know it better as the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. And the reason why this was created was to minimize the amount of solid waste that's being produced by cities. And what is key here is the order: reduce, reuse, and then recycle. A lot of times people just jump right to recycle, like, oh, I can buy this plastic bottle of water. It's okay. I can recycle it. It's good for the environment. But really what you should have done first is reduce that need, and then of course the reuse the bottle and then recycle it. So let's go through some of those R's. In the step reducing waste, again, the idea is quite simple. You want to try to reduce the amount of solid waste that you are creating. So that could be reducing your consumption of things, reducing packaging. Maybe you could tax people on their trash bill so that they wouldn't generate as much solid waste, or potentially use things like photo or biodegradable plastics that break down and do not stay as that solid waste. The second step in integrated waste management is reuse. So there's a variety of techniques you can do to employ reuse: refillable bottles, reusable bottles. A lot of people here use fabric bags for groceries because we get charged if we use the plastic ones. And then also there's a big industry for reusing car parts, oil, things along that nature. And then the last step of integrated waste management is recycling. So this is where you turn discarded materials into new ones. And of course, there are many advantages to this. It does reduce virgin natural resources. It frees up landfill space. There's less deforestation and less habitat loss. Of course, there are drawbacks to recycling. It's very expensive for cities to start and maintain. A lot of these recycling trucks, they are big, heavy equipment. They generate a lot of carbon dioxide from their emissions. And recycled products tend to be more expensive because of the laws of supply and demand. And a lot of people think that recycling plants are green and good, but a lot of them do consume much energy, much heat in order to turn those materials into something new. And of course, those plants are using energy and creating greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide that are being released into the atmosphere. These are the 3 most commonly recycled materials. We have glass bottles, aluminum cans, and lastly, paper. And when we recycle that paper, it tends to be lower grade than what it started at, and also requires bleach to de-ink the materials. Okay, everyone, that completes our solid waste talk, and I will talk at you soon.